Hello and welcome to CHGO Red Stars Podcast, presented to you by PointsBet. Download the PointsBet app today and sign up with code CHGO to get your two bets risk-free up to $2,000. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER for crisis counseling and referral services. CHGO Red Stars, the podcast where we talk about all things Chicago Red Stars, and we do mean all things. There's been a lot going on across the league, NWSL, and with the Red Stars specifically, and we got to talk about it, and we're going to do that today. It's me, your girl, Sandra, joined as always by our friend, homie, and colleague, Claire Watkins, aka Scam Originator Claire. We've been fielding this question a lot this last week. How are you?
Well, I guess today we've upgraded from like a bad to a don't know.
Yeah, right? There are definitely some moments where I was like, I'm completely miserable right now, but also not as miserable as some other days during the week. So there's been a lot of checking in this week, because if people need to get caught up, on Monday, the U.S. Soccer Federation made public and released the full report and findings of the commissioned Sally Q. Yates investigation into abuse across women's professional soccer. And it was a very hefty report, and it was the entire 300 plus pages worth of investigation report, findings, and recommendations. It was a very large scope investigation, and the report centered in around 3 specific clubs, though Yates has reiterated and includes a recommendation within that there's concerns for youth soccer as well, and that this is where they narrowed the report against, as these were primarily the 3 franchises that were mostly making headlines in 2021. So this full report was released after we went through a 2021 where there was extensive reporting on various stories of sexual harassment and allegations across the league. And U.S. Soccer went ahead and commissioned Sally Yates. And now we have that full report. I guess we just start at the top there. First reactions when you saw it, buddy?
I wanted to throw up.
Yeah, terrible, sick.
I think another refrain this week has been that I think people are still getting through the whole thing. Not just because it's very long, but also because it's like every sentence is the worst thing you've ever read in your entire life. And it takes some time to get through and process that. And you maybe have the stomach for one section, and then you just kind of have to like take a walk and come back to it. I think emotionally, and this is another thing that I think players have indicated this week as well, and I know that I feel this way, is it makes it feel like it's happening again, to read through it. It makes it feel very present again, and you're kind of right back in this moment from last year, except in more detail. And so that part's been hard. But, in other ways, I think everybody placed a lot of faith in these investigations, right? Placed a lot of faith in the Yates investigation, further faith in the league and Players Association joint investigation. And I know there were fears that we expressed them actually last week, right? Fears that there would be punches pulled.
Yep.
And there is relief in a way of reading through the report and seeing that that is not the case, while also understanding that the Players Association has indicated there's more, and I believe them. I think that when Yates said at some point I just had to stop, otherwise I'd be doing this for the rest of my life, she meant that.
Yeah, that was a real ass response to an important question.
And then past that, yeah, I mean, I don't know. What's your take, Sandra?
Fucking sucks.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how players who A went through that and B have continued to sort of go through everything over the last year can feel. Like, I keep kind of bringing myself back to that. Like, if I feel terrible and gross, and have days that have highs and lows, how do some of these players feel? How do some of the victims, feel specifically? Yeah, again, I don't think we're not interested in coming on here and rehashing and going through a timeline of events for everything, for a number of reasons, because of the constant content warnings that we would probably have to put on this episode, number one. And then number two, it's made public. We've encouraged people to read that if that's something that they could stomach. As Claire said, take your time with it. The reports out of The Athletic, Washington Post, and others are still out there and accessible. People can also read those to get additional context. But there's something about this within going through this report for job purposes. Even knowing that it was, like you said, going to reopen things, there are new and expanded details within this report that are just, quite frankly, enraging, and ultimately exposing the level to which I can't speak for you, but the level to which I feel like I have been gaslit this entire time trying to cover this team over the course of certain years is free for all. Like, I've burnt to a crisp. I'm like a walking kebab. And it's a sentiment I think that is shared, quite frankly, because what we've seen in terms of the reaction, like post reaction to all this stuff, is plenty of other people in more important places reacting to that as well. I mean, I think people were in this phase right now where many people are looking at and wondering, okay, well, what's that next step of like responsible accountability? Like, what does that look like? And it still feels terrible because there's nothing in place. There's nothing in place to hold people accountable. There was nothing in place, and nothing existed to protect the players. So there's nothing that exists to dismiss or remove perpetrators of said abuse. So there's a lot of things and feelings that I felt, not just in this moment, but I felt last year. I feel again now in this present moment, and that I'll probably feel, when the joint investigation comes out between the players union and the league. And then therefore probably be upset further into who beyond. I don't want to, dictate or predetermine stressors, but I can't imagine that this is done and dusted by any means, nor should that be the appropriate, then that's not an appropriate mindset to have around it. Like, hey, now that there's a report that has dropped, let's just, look ahead and keep it moving. Like, no, there's like things that have to come out after this. So within this report specifically, yes, it highlights and revisits a lot of the very terrible things that happened within the Portland Thorns franchise. It introduces and sheds new light on things within the Racing Louisville FC franchise, and it revisits and reopens all of the things with during Rory Dame's times with the Chicago Red Stars, and that in particular feels, I think, most jarring for a number of reasons. One, it's because here we are doing a ridiculous podcast about the Red Stars, and two, it's the tenure of it all. You're talking about a Portland Thorns franchise that's revisiting a certain part of their history. And some of the reaction out of that is, we saw their head coach, Ryan Wilkinson, a former Canadian international, current head coach of that team, someone who had played with that franchise for some time, come out with a statement and feels that her coaching staff, her team, her players, that things are trending in the right direction. They want to keep that going despite this very specific moment in time for Portland. And you have Racing Louisville coming out with statements, although there hasn't been a ton of accountability there just yet, referring to a very specific time in their franchise, and it's a very young franchise. It's only 2 years old. And then you have the Chicago Red Stars portion of this, a franchise that has existed beyond the NWSL, that had Rory Dames as its head coach and general manager since beyond its NWSL existence. They are the one franchise in this report where you have multi-year complaints.
Almost 10 years of complaints.
We're talking about a near decade.
Yeah.
Appalling. It's appalling. So Claire and I went back and forth a little bit. How do we come on here and talk about this? I don't know if there is a way to actually talk about it other than reaction, like honest reaction, and how we process things, and sadness, like, quite frankly, a complete sadness around it.
Yeah, well said. I went back actually last night. Because just sort of, it's been hard. It's, in the day today, you're like, I am trying to remember last year. I'm trying to remember, everything that's happened. And I actually went back to the episode of Meg Linehan's podcast that I recorded with her the day after the Washington Post article on Rory Dames came out, and the first Washington Post article, I should say. Yeah. And it's interesting to go back, and I was just like, I've told people this, like, I think that everything was a year ago, it felt kind of overwhelming in a way of like being very confusing in a way that I think is hopefully no longer the case. Like, I can speak for myself, is no longer the case. And then that conversation talking about just like you said, the constant struggle of having no idea if a single thing you're ever told by the club is true, whether it's from the coaching staff or ownership or comms or anything, like just genuinely having no idea what ways you're being used as a mouthpiece for things that are not true. You think about, like, a year ago, it was clear, right, that there ultimately needed to be other changes at Chicago. And like I said, there was a lot of faith placed in these investigations to bring that to light, because ultimately that is what will do that, is the investigations being done internally. And then in the off season, that message from the club that Arnhem had stepped back. He was very sorry and he had stepped back. Vicky Lynch told reporters that, and told the supporters group that in, I assume, an attempt to like retain their money. And then this report comes out and we get the exact same message. We get the, oh, well, now Arnold Whistler is going to step back from full operational activities. And then a day later, we got really, he's going to no longer be on the board. This is after the second statement. This is after the statement on Monday. We get a second statement being like, well, when he said that, what he meant was he was going to stay on as chairman of the board. But actually he's not.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of like sums it up, right?
Yeah. I think it's also just perhaps just a very small window into how the inner workings of how the franchise is trying to navigate and deal with this as well. Again, I say very small because let's be frank, ever since November of 2021, there has been very little to zero effective, communication or transparency by the club to the public, whether it's public facing media or to their supporters. Maybe we should lean into that a little bit, perhaps, because it includes them as well, because we're seeing reaction from supporters groups of the Chicago Red Stars, including one of the biggest and main and longest standing supporters groups of the Red Stars in Chicago, Local 134. They too were, in a feeling of being gaslit, and feeling like they were being told one thing, and then obviously other things were happening and occurring otherwise. But again, non-public facing. Those apparently, though, according to the supporters group, those were conversations that took place privately with ownership, with Arnold Whistler and Chief Business Officer Becky Lynch. That all of that was private. That it was meant to be behind closed doors. Those reassurances that they were being given were ultimately, for it sort of just comes across now as if they've a little bit of like, hush hush. It's like, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're going to tell you that we're doing and that we're working on, so that you continue to retain a presence at these games. And again, that's just more appalling behavior, quite frankly, by the franchise. I don't want to put words in any supporter group's mouths, but I mean, Local 134 released a statement, like headline Arnold Whistler knew. It states as follows: the report released by Sally Yates and U.S. Soccer Federation unequivocally proves that Arnold Whistler is unfit to continue in his current role as majority owner of the Chicago Red Stars organization. We find the reported details of Whistler's conduct, especially his dismissal of player complaints about the conduct of former general manager / head coach Rory Dames, completely unacceptable and irredeemably harmful to not only the players, but the club as a whole. In addition, many of the details in the report regarding Whistler directly contradict what he has told us as a group regarding knowledge of Dames's abuse. As such, Local 134 has lost all trust in Whistler's ability to provide a safe workplace for players and front office staff. We believe and support the players and staff who have bravely shared their stories of neglect and abuse from the club and its owner. Until Arnhem divests from the Chicago Red Stars, Local 134 will be boycotting all in-person events, including attendance at home games, merchandise purchases, and other Red Stars events that directly or indirectly benefit Arnold Whistler. We recommend those who have renewed. We recommend that those who have renewed their 2023 tickets demand a full refund. They close stating, "We stand behind the Red Stars players and staff, past and present, who were the subject of this abuse and who continue to fight against the enabled abuse and racism that the club has allowed. We also stand with youth players past and present of Eclipse, who were taken advantage of and treated as no person deserves to be treated. Support the players. Consider donating the cost of a ticket to the NWSL Players Association and or Black Women's Player Collective instead of financially supporting abusers. End quote. Yeah, pretty direct and clear statement from the supporters group who, ahead of 2021 were saying that they were going to constantly be, evaluating their relationship to the club. So with those statements that you just mentioned from the franchise, how there was one direct statement from Arnold Whistler saying that he was going to remove himself from the board of governors, and then CHGO Red Stars board of directors said, actually, we're removing you from chairman. There was nothing within that statement from Chicago's board of directors that really indicated a disinvestment. But like I was saying earlier, there's unfortunately not a lot of protocols in these type of events. Like, what can this board of directors make happen for the Chicago Red Stars moving forward? And this might be one of, or possibly the only, like, very direct things that they could do at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to just like allude to shit. So like,
yeah, of course.
Arnold Whistler for over a decade enabled Rory Dames and his power over the Red Stars staff and players. He fielded years and years of complaints from both staff and players themselves. He ran an organization that Yates constantly called a toxic workplace for both players and staff. He did not meet, because there were no standards, he did not rise to meet any for the years that he was the steward of this club. And it took reporting and the investigation for those things to be made clear, because ultimately the club, whether genuinely or just to save face, lied for a long time. Some of which are like, they can't even keep up with those lies. Like the Arnold Whistler operational like day-to-day activities. There's no knowledge of what they even said last year in that new statement. Yeah. The fact that he told multiple reporters that he got feedback from players that they wanted to keep Dames through the end of last year, despite the fact that internally a sports psychologist had said that 70%, including multiple starters, exhibited experiences of abuse and had complained about the abuse.
How do you go from the results of that and following whatever weird path that you're on, and you say that? You say, no, the players wanted to finish this season like this.
Well, that's always been the MO. That has 100% has been the way the club handles things, which is they, under the guise of protecting players or standing up for their players, they speak for them. And we know this, Sandra, going back to 2020 Challenge Cup, 2021, trying to talk to Dames himself, push him on his own conduct, and like just everything from the club being like, everything's fine, and continuing to try to cover the players and cover the games. And I just think that at this element, it's just, this is again, it's like why this absolutely just cannot continue. And you talk about needing to clean house. I'm like, anybody who has been caught in those kinds of lies in the last 3 years, I don't know why we believe that they are going to stop.
Yeah.
They clearly decided that is more important than transparency and accountability.
Yeah, it was like even with this most recent statement from the Red Stars board of directors, watching the reaction from like watching out for what was going to be reaction or statement from the club, which we've gotten two over those first 48 hours of the Yates report being dropped. And I mean, I remember that first statement from Whistler specifically, and you and I reacting to that immediately, in terms of being like that Whistler's intention was to step back and remove his place from the NWSL Board of Governors. And you and I remembering that media had already been told that Whistler had taken a step back, and that perhaps the argument from this club was going to be like, well, that was day to day, this is league governance. And then it's like, what's different between a step back and then another step back? And then you've got about 12 to 18 hours later, the board of directors making an additional statement saying, no, actually, he's going to be removed from Chicago Red Stars governance. Like, he's no longer going to be chairman of the board, and we're going to transition this. So they want to move to codify. That was the verbiage that they used in that statement. Following up on that with Chicago Red Stars because there was a number of things that I wanted to follow up on. Like, it's not in hiding. We talked a little bit about that. You can go to the Chicago Red Stars website and see the list of the board of directors of the Red Stars. Now, they're not listed as a board of directors. They're listed as something completely different. It's like board of managers and associate co-chairs. And at the time, Arnold Whistler was listed amongst those names. But as of now, if you go visit that now, there's only 6 names on that board of governors. And one of those, 5 of those are, new investors who came into this franchise in 2021. Like, they just got here. And then one of those is a investor with the Chicago Red Stars since 2007. So the founding of this organization. So now there's 6, right? So getting clarity on that, just, following up with Chicago Red Stars comms and saying like, hey, is the board of directors the same as the board of managers and advisory board that's actually listed on the website? And it was like, yes. But that in itself is also like incredibly annoying. Like, if that's your board of directors, call it the board of directors on your website. Why are you naming a thing a different thing? It's like at this point, can anybody keep up with
why do you
like, I just don't understand.
Why do you start hurt players and don't put them on the availability report?
Why do you do that?
Why? Why, it's all just this double speak. Like, even again, that board of directors statement, I think what they did was right. There's 2 statements within that, though. One is that codifying of his lack of involvement. I don't know what that means. And then secondly, that statement to the Sun-Times about their hoping to facilitate a sale. Don't know what that means either. I'm also hoping to facilitate a sale of the Chicago Red Stars. Yeah. But I don't know I can't make it happen. And so I'm just like, it's just frustration upon frustration upon frustration. And I think ultimately, again, I don't see anything from this last week that really makes me think that anything has changed other than the coach on the field.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just interesting how, like, we're thinking of probably one of the first and, quite frankly, last times that we ever had any media availability with CBO Lynch, associate general manager Michelle Wamnicki. Yeah, the first and last time they spoke to the media in a sort of public setting, it was virtual, was in February. First and last time. Be it by design or otherwise, that's a fact. The fact is there hasn't been a public media facing availability with people who were tasked apparently with the day-to-day operations of the Chicago Red Stars in 2022 specifically. And I don't know what that's going to look like from this club moving forward. Is there going to be a continued theme of, hiding, essentially, not making themselves available? Is that continued very damaging theme of handling things in house still going to be the way in the process?
And it also gets into, there's this line of talking, walking this line of what's like the best way to put this? This is not why. The reason why behind this should be because you are a moral person who wants to do right, not only as a employer, but as a person who cares about other people. But this is not sustainable. Like, it goes, you and I have had this conversation so many times, right? Why is nobody coming to Bridgeview? We talked about at the beginning of the season, we talked about going to that Mexico game at Soldier Field and the disconnect between the Red Stars and the largest soccer fan base in the city. And you can talk about location and marketing and whatever, but the allegations of racism,
oh my God,
in the behind the scenes of this club are atrocious. And those kinds of things manifest in day-to-day operations. And so it comes from it comes from like every point. And that amount, like that, again, it's that intersection of incompetence and actual malice, intentional or unintentional, that creates this situation and puts this team in this spiral. We're not going to act like anybody was really covering this team this year, right? And it's because of the way that they don't have an infrastructure for media. They do not make themselves or they do not do a good job of fielding difficult questions. And that has caused a greater disconnect between larger media, like the newspapers, let's say that, and the team. And then again, you get this messaging of just like, we're doing our best with what we have and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, first of all, the reason why that is true comes from the head of your team. And also, when you get the backstory of it, no, actually, there was also just serious issues of misogyny and racism behind the scenes as well. As we know, those play out in action. And I think you can just see it all around the club. And I think what I don't know is, when is it enough to, like, at what point do these Chicago Red Stars, what do? You whittle it down to a name and a logo and then start over? Like, how do you eradicate that? And Alana Cook said this week, infancy stages of even getting close. And so I fear that what actually happens next is we find out what people have deemed acceptable instead. And I want the ship to stay afloat. I want there to be a soccer team in Chicago. I want there to be an NWSL team in Chicago. I'm not going to pretend like I don't. I want there to be a league in this country. I want players to feel safe to play in it. But there is still so much work to do.
Oh my God. It feels like just the mountain is like very, very, very unscalable right now. Like, so not only are we at like the foot of it, it just feels like unscalable.
Yeah.
Right now. And I think that is what is like most daunting about it. I think there's always hope, right? Like there's always hope, you know, but what's the saying? It's the hope that kills you, right? And there's just like, I think a little bit of that mixed bag right now. The only way forward is like eventually having to start at some point. And I think that is sort of where we're at, like right now. I think many of us in the space, whether you find yourself as a fan or a supporter or a member of the media, somebody who's part of staff across the many front offices of this league, for whether that's for a club specifically or you know, the league as a whole, or affiliated with a youth club, or et cetera, right? Trying to figure out what that first actual step is, I think, is where we're at right now. Because with all the reactions and the statements that's been coming, there's been some of that like reaction to it as well. Like, oh, well, this is a first step. And there's a part of me that's like, is it? Is this actually a first step? Like, I don't. I actually just think there's like a lot of gathering at the foot of the mountain to determine what that actual good first step is. So we're like, it's still like ground level right now. Absolutely.
And it's gonna like, we're going, I was remembered like looking at this a year ago and looking at it now. And I think we're going to have to find, like, there's new league leadership, right?
Yeah.
We, and I, you know, I trust the stewardship of Megan Burke and the PA. You know, we talked last week about scope, and it's like, there are so many issues that I have to think there's going to be action to get the worst offenders out, which is important. But this is now also a process of vigilance and continuing to work back things that I don't think this report even addressed. And I think money will solve some of it. I do not think it will solve all of it. And yeah, I don't know. I think I'm starting to like lose my train of thought now because it's just kind of been a lot. But
because it's been a lot, and B, there's like no actual, like I said, like there's no actual like next step in front of anybody here right now.
We just have to wait.
There's still going to be a waiting period. There's still a joint investigation that
I think
that's going to be made public eventually, right? That's still ongoing.
I think in the nature of having to compartmentalize, which players talked about, what I anticipate is you know, there's a U.S. game to be played today, right? There's another one next week. There are playoffs to play, and then we will eventually get the joint investigation, at which point, well, two things. At which point, if these owners have truly been barred from operations, if that is true this time, then the process of facilitating sales hopefully does not affect the clubs too much. However, as we know, you can't sit in that limbo forever. There's no incentive for a selling owner to invest more money into a club. Chicago can't survive an off season with nothing. Yeah. The margins are already so thin. Certainly for a team that seems to have lost player goodwill. And so it's scary. It's a little bit scary to think about what comes next as well, as necessary as it is.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I think there's a lot of unknown, uncharted territories here. I think while I believe that the league is in a good place financially, I
agree with that.
I am also of the same belief that that's not necessarily true for certain clubs in the league. And I include the Red Stars in that equation. Again, it's just another very sad, ongoing, too little, too late type of circumstances that have very obviously and very appropriately caught up with the primary owner of this club. So I feel for that new wave of investors who came in 2021. I would imagine that they are dealing with things that they could have never have anticipated. I remember being on that call with you with this new flood of investorships. And one of the things that Sarah Spain talked about was that, that she wanted to be told of, and given insight to the club and the players' needs and all that. And I would imagine that if the current ownership at the time operated as they have in the past, that they probably omitted a lot of things from that new wave of investors. So I would imagine that moving forward, that it's going to be quite the off season. And what that looks like for the Chicago Red Stars moving forward will be TBD. Unfortunately, the waiting, it's the hardest part at the time. So that is what's next. What's next is that we don't know. And I don't think
what's next is they have to play a playoff game.
Well, for the players, that's what's next for the players. For the franchise, I don't know what's next. They're going. I mean, the players of the Chicago Red Stars are going to participate in the 2022 NWSL playoffs. So, I remember on the last episode we talked about that a little bit. That some of the storylines and the narratives around the roster and the team were that they probably were going to be a team that struggled over the 2022 season. That maybe this was going to be the year that did not feature a Chicago Red Stars team in the playoffs. And the players of this team showed otherwise. They went out there on their final match day of the regular season and handed Angel City a 2-0 loss. And in that, clinched the absolute final spot in the NWSL playoffs. They are the number 6 seed overall. And they will be playing in a quarterfinal game against San Diego Wave FC. So they're going to be on the road, San Diego, try to perhaps go on a championship run. Although I would hate to be in their positions. I think it's a tough time to be a Chicago Red Star right now.
There are a lot of parallels to last year, to be honest. That's again where I'm like, what's changed? The team is hurt. They're depleted. They have given a lot of themselves to keep above the playoff line. When we talk about players like Danny Colaprico and Vanessa DiBernardo, like not leaving the field, yes, amazing. But like, why did they have to do that? Why have they had to do that for 8 years? Both wingbacks that played last week were hurt. Both Rachel Hill and Sarah Lubert were hurt. Aaron Wright sat down. Aaron Wright sat down at the end of the game with it looked like they were looking at that ankle because she played 90 minutes on it and she probably shouldn't have had to, in a position that she's never played before.
Yep.
And they did it, you know? And I think that is part of this story, is just the resiliency of this team. And how this is actually something also that, like, you know, it comes into clarity, right? I know for me, for the years that I was more, or the years where it was a little bit less clear, like, why this was always so hard. I think you watch the team and you go, they're always dealing with it's always something, right?
Yeah.
Whether, you know, and it's like the semifinal thing, like struggling to get past a semifinal, and you see semifinal performances and you're like, why did that look like that?
Yep.
Finally, some context to those things, right? Last year, made it to overtime in a championship game.
Yeah.
Where we didn't know if the star striker was going to be playing until like 24 hours before. Vanessa DiBernardo sits down in like the 11th minute with a hamstring injury that we didn't know about.
Yep.
Tatum Milazzo can't go in overtime because she's already played so many minutes as a rookie that her body's not set up for that. Pugh gets knocked out of the game halfway through. It's like, when we talked about this last week, we talked about this all season, where it's like, the reason why you want playoffs for these players is because they've earned it. And I think what we have seen over the course of years is that they can't do it by themselves.
Yeah.
But what they have been able to do by themselves is incredible and should never happen again.
Here's hoping. It's yeah, it was very it was very revealing a little bit, I think, in that final regular season post game that we got to sit in on with head coach Chris Petroselli, Alyssa Nair, and Vanessa DiBernardo. DiBernardo has been with this franchise since 2014. You had Alyssa Nair, who's been with this franchise since 2016, and a head coach who got hired in the middle of preseason of 2022. And it was nice to have that contrast. I'll be frank, it really was, because it really was, I don't want to say enlightening, but you see these veteran players in a position that I don't think people realize that they're in. I don't know if the players realize that they're in this position, but they too are coaches on this team.
Yeah.
The coaching staff of the CHGO Red Stars in 2022 consists of Alyssa Nair, Vanessa DiBernardo, Danny Colaprico, Aaron Wright. Probably list goes on and on and on. But it was very it was a bit of, you know, if nothing else, confirmation of that. Because yes, we talk about veteran players that they have this experience of the league, but you're looking at the Red Stars and how they have always sort of operated, right? It's laughable now with the information that you have at hand to look at it and say that operating on a shoestring budget was some type of compliment. That's an insult. It's sad. And Petroselli, I think we both agreed on this before, has done a good job of just sort of being a central head figure in terms of that coaching staff, fielding questions from the media about as honestly as he can with information that he has. But this last one, with those three in particular, and the season that they just went through, it really was. I mean, we got to talk to them about not just that moment in particular, like, hey, like, you're going to the playoffs, but the manner in which this team got to this point this season. And there was a lot of discussion about the fact that this team is very split down the middle in terms of players who have been here for quite some time and players who are just earning minutes for the first time in their professional careers.
Yeah. Yeah, Alyssa Nair has given actually a lot of really good quotes this year. Again, when you listen to her talk, you're like, thank you, coach.
Yeah. Thanks, Coach Nair.
Thanks, Coach Nair. Yeah, like we asked, right? We just basically straight up asked. We said, is there an extra element of pride of being the ones tasked with upholding the playing standards this season? And they said yes. They said, yeah, I go back to Vanessa DiBernardo at the Soldier Field game, showing that emotion about Alyssa Motts and just saying, like, we've been through a lot together. And I think that those players, you kind of go down the list, right? Nair, Wright, Colaprico, DiBernardo, Gautrat as well, who, again, God only knows. We know how little we know about what she's gone through this season, right? Like, maybe it was fine, but I don't know.
Who knows?
Who knows? And then, you've got someone like Mallory Pugh, who has become the face of the team, essentially, and a lot of pressure placed on her shoulders to deliver results and her ability to actually do that. And they said it is, you look at the players around you and you do want it more as a group because of those relationships that you've developed. And Nair said, for the players that are still there, they really care about each other.
Yeah.
I'm sure they also really care about the players that are not there too. That's not what I'm saying. I don't want to but in
this moment, in present day,
moment, right, with the task at hand, and then you get the context of maybe how those bonds were forged, and it's like that. It's that dichotomy of they did an incredible thing and they should never, ever, ever have to do it again. And I think both can be true at the same time.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, I hope the younger players are okay. I think that this has to be very scary for them, honestly. Yeah. Things that they probably didn't know about going in. Maybe if there were some of those step backs this season, hopefully not experiences that they themselves had this year. It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
To say the least. I also real quick, and I said this on the other podcast that I do, but I also just want to say, like, publicly as much as possible, a public thank you to everybody who participated in that investigation, whether they put their name on it or not. Red Stars players, current Red Stars players, former Red Stars players, staff. I think hopefully people see a picture of why that is so brave. And how you could find yourself in a situation where that's hard to do. And I think the honesty that I read in that report, I found very moving, because I don't think players do know when they're allowed to talk or not. And that is also not okay.
Yep. Problems highlighting problems.
Right.
Hopefully what's next is finding solutions to those things. And I know you and I will be doing our best to cover it, and hopefully he'll find solutions as well. So we'll see. It's been a tough week. There is no Chicago Red Stars game this weekend. That San Diego Wave FC quarterfinal will be taking place on October 16th. So about 9 days out. If we will see if there will be some playoff media availability coming up soon, and how that's structured, and hopefully get in touch with the players and how they feel about heading into the playoffs for the 7th consecutive time. In the meantime, thanks everybody for joining us today on CHGO Red Stars. As always, doing our best. And if for whatever reason you're looking for a way to support the work, you could do that with a CHGO membership. So go on ahead and get your subscription as a CHGO member. You get access to all kinds of podcasts on every single Chicago professional sports team. You get access to premium written content, merchandise, free t-shirt when you become a member, and access to a members only discount, the CHGO Lounge on Discord. So thanks everybody for joining us. Continue to take care of each other's, and we'll be back hopefully with a much better update. Take care.